What were we chatting about? Go back.
This is why I talk about, rates of return a lot with people, because we're so, as a society, we're so fixated on rates of return, because that's what we're kind of ingrained in our brains to talk about, in terms when it comes to finances. When you're talking about rates of return, that's what we're so locked in. I need to get 8%, 12%. I can get 13%. I can get 9%. Rates of return doesn't really mean a whole lot if you don't have access to most of that money when you need it. So if you've driven all these assets into these types of vehicles and they're all governed by the IRS, let's say, because it's a 401k or IRAs or whatever it is, it's still being dictated how much access of your money that you've saved to have access to, versus protecting the money, utilizing the money on your behalf, not just in the future, but today, as you and I have talked about for a long time. Having access and use of your money while you're alive or while you're working, to me, is so important. We talk about accumulation and hoping that it has a value at the end that's greater than when you started, versus a concept that maybe, let's try a term called money in motion, or a velocity on your money, meaning let's take your money and force the action to happen. Let's make $1 work like 2, $1 work like 10. That's what banks do on a daily basis, and we just don't understand or are taught that at any point in our adult lives. We don't know how banks truly operate. They don't produce or make anything. They're just a service. They just understand how money works, and they utilize it to their advantage. Seriously, what do they make? There's nothing tangible that a bank makes. They're not a manufacturing firm. They're not printing or making money. That's the Federal Reserve. That's the Treasury. They're not making any of that. All they do is they understand how money works, and they use all those philosophies to their advantage to make themselves exponentially more wealthy than they already are, profit-wise. We're not shown how to do that, versus showing someone that path and be able to have them reap the rewards of those benefits that the banks are experiencing. We're not taught those things. I mean, think about what we were just talking about earlier. If interest rates are going to continue to go up and the feds are going to continue to do this, why are we putting everything in the basket to where, okay, we don't know, we might be 35, 40 years old or 25 years old, and we're just starting to work, and we're putting money aside, and we're putting monies into 401ks and those types of plans. Our tax liability might be greater down the road than they are today, almost guaranteed to happen. And here's one of the things that people don't pay attention to. As you become more successful in life and you make more money, and you're putting more and more and more of your hard-earned income into a 401k plan, because you have the ability to max those out, whereas early on you don't, because maybe you don't have that type of income. So maybe you're putting $500 a month into that versus $20,000 a year, roughly, which is the maximum. Well, if someone gets to that point, look what's happening. Your tax liability, as you make more money, your tax liability increases. So if you're making more money and you're putting more money into those plans because you have the means to do so, all you're doing is increasing your tax liability on top of possible rates of return. God forbid that you're in a situation where the markets are dropping and you're continuing to funnel those systems with those kind of monies, your tax liability is increasing. How are you really getting ahead? I think people just ignore too much of what the tax liability and inflation, like we're experiencing right now, has on their money versus the rate of return. They ignore the other part, and they focus solely on rates of return. It can't be the only thing that they're looking at. And I think too many people have blinders on to saying, oh, well, I got 9% rate of return, but and if someone like me, I only got 4%, let's say. Well, they think we're so much better off than I am. No, they're not. A lot of what I'm doing is not taxable. Theirs is. So they may have increased their rates of return, but they've increased their tax liability, and I don't have any, potentially, or much less because of just different things that we're doing. I just think too many people are focused on rates of return and not enough on inflation and taxes, which are the biggest eroders of money.